Good afternoon. For the presentation today, I'm speaking about a documentary podcast that journalist Malcolm Gladwell did. It's called McDonald's Broke My Heart, from the series Revisionist History. Malcolm Gladwell is a really great journalist that I'd totally recommend checking out. His book Blink, The Power of Thinking Without Thinking is a really great one, and in Revisionist History it's a series of podcasts that he looks at history overlooked, and McDonald's Broke My Heart is one that he talks about, specifically relating to the nutrition course about McDonald's and the transition from using beef tella to cook their fries in, and that transition to using animal fat. So it's all based around the person that was the spokesman voicing out against saturated fat, which at the time was believed to be the reason, the main issue with the health problems that were what he saw as the health problems were big fast food companies just using copious amount of fats and cooking their food, and that was unnecessary. So Phil Sokoloff is not part of the food industry. He was a man that made a ton of money selling housing equipment, and his journey in his battle against McDonald's started when he had a heart attack at the age of 43 that right spooked him out, and instead of just taking care of his own health, he kind of saw it as his mission to bring ideas to the general public about how copious excessive amounts of saturated fat and how lots of meat was depleting in terms of people's health. So he starts with all these kind of legislative and lobbying acts to try to change some of the laws around health, starting with skim milk in all the schools in America. What was whole milk before got changed to skim milk in the school milk programs. He got huge billboards in Times Square that essentially said, cut saturated fat, live longer. And then he started turning to the main companies, going on to big fast food, trying to get them to change their products. And of course the biggest company is and was McDonald's, but the big fast food corporations he referred as the fountains of fat, and this was made public on the show, the Phil Donahue Show, where a representative from McDonald's and Phil Sokoloff are going at it, and he basically stomps all over this guy in terms of the debate they're having, and then McDonald's starts to realize this guy's an issue, and all the meanwhile Phil Sokoloff is putting so much money into trying to change some of these laws. It was estimated that he put several $million into changing these things all 30 years ago, and it was just never seen before, an outlier from the food industry coming in with all this money and saying that he wants to change things. And the lobbying actually took kind of forms of bribery over time. So that brings me to kind of that's the background. And in terms of nutritionally how things changed, is that in 1990 McDonald's surrenders, and beef tallow, which is the pure beef fat that these fries were cooked in, was swapped out, and it became almost a 10-year period of McDonald's trying to change the types of fat that were used. So the first blend was a mixture of cottonseed fat and corn oil, and then soon they, doing the nutritional breakdown of that, realized that that contained, as opposed to saturated fat, tons of trans fat that a little bit later on people would realize is actually worse for them. So that was swapped out for various different types of vegetable oils over this 10-year period, and it's interesting because they were looking for taste that would work for the public, but also in terms of oil being cooked, vegetable oils were degrading differently than animal fat was. So this is when the electrons in vegetable oil, as they're becoming used over and over again, mix and bond with the oxygen, and that creates like this degradation process where they become super unstable, and so nutrition wise, the consequences is that aldehydes were created as a byproduct of this chemical process. This new chemical arose, and aldehydes is actually just like listed as a straight up toxin for humans. And doing research into aldehydes, you quickly see that why they would try to change their mixture of frying oils that they're cooking in to come with something a little bit more safe, because aldehydes is a pure toxin. So what was happening, not nutritionally, but as a consequence of this, is that kind of paint would be forming around the fryers, and perhaps you would have had this experience, or one would have this experience in the 90s and going into the early 2000s of fast food joints, their furniture being sticky. And that was this kind of mist that would arise from the caked on degraded oils that would be stuck to the fryers. So this was releasing this mist, and meanwhile all of this is super unstable. So the breakdown products would be on the uniforms of people working in these stores, and there was one case noted that the uniforms getting stacked in the back of a truck to get cleaned, just the process of stacking these on top of each other caused all the materials to simultaneously combust. And that, I guess that just totally speaks for how unstable these things were in terms of their electron breakdown. That there was a huge issue here, obviously. So finally they worked out a vegetable oil formula that was more stable, but all the while Phil Sokoloff, in his effort to eliminate saturated fat, has upped the amount of trans fat, and the knowledge at the time 30 years back was known so little about trans fat, but it's really swapping one devil out for another, and it just is kind of a realization that when we're cooking with oils, necessarily the French fry can't be good for you. It's the process of taking a potato and heating it so that steam is released, creating it to be fluffy, but then it becomes enriched with fat again. It's the substitution of water for fat, and that's how you get a fluffy inside and a hard outside. This is something that people look forward to when eating food, this texture and this taste, but honestly, when it comes to starch and fat, it's a nutritionally stripped product, and that's something that we have to deal with when we want to say animal fat is bad, so vegetable fat must be good, which is something along the line of Phil Sokoloff's effort, and really we should be talking about alternatives that wouldn't be enriching water for fat. It becomes necessarily kind of bad, and then you'd rather have a conversation about eating this stuff in small quantities. The opposite is true. When the first French fries came out, they were a small 4 to 5 ounce portion. Now that's doubled or tripled, and when it came to the beef tillo fries, you didn't need more than that small amount. We see the excess of these fries being not as tasty, and just becoming kind of a filler food where people have gotten used to having a larger amount of this side product of this potato than their actual meal that they're ordering. Just to wrap up, Malcolm Gladwell always ends up with a cool monologue at the end that contains the subject matter but kind of turns more introspectively than that. So he starts off his final monologue by saying, "Do I hate Phil Sokoloff for what he does?" And then he says, "No, I hate McDonald's for backing down and replacing what was the most delicious fry essentially with cardboard." And it becomes this really interesting talk that's super pertinent to nutrition class, where we're working in the food industry and we're all about flavor. And some people might think that this nutrition class would be the enemy of that. Being enlightened about these issues would leave us kind of helpless as in terms of how to create healthy food and such. And it becomes a really interesting discussion in an effort to make humans in general more healthy, what we're giving up. And it's kind of a nostalgic moment for Malcolm Gladwell, where there was this era where this kind of ignorant, this blissful ignorance had people more happy maybe, and what we're giving up when we trade the most delicious fry for cardboard is what he describes it. So it's a kind of cool wrap up to kind of take everything into perspective, and being enlightened about these issues has done us so much better. But what are we losing by choosing to play entirely to just what would be the healthy lifestyle, and that a little bit moderation would be good in that, to kind of, he's talking about, I guess, the simple joys of life, and it's done in a kind of quaint example of the dumb French fry. But I think it speaks volumes, and even though necessarily I'd like to prescribe to both beliefs of the healthy lifestyle, it's a cool wrap up where he says to take it with a grain of salt, and to not making a healthy society sterile in that sense, where our joys and what we crave are totally stripped away from us. So the recipe I created, I kind of took it on a challenge to create a healthier version of the French fry, or something equivalent of just a side dish that would be totally delicious, and isn't deep fried. So that enriching process of enriching the starch, stripping it of water, enriching it with fat doesn't occur when we do something like a baked vegetable. And then from there, I think there are kind of some secret tastes that you can add to this baked vegetable, so that it's not just mundane or anything like that. That can be really interesting. So my idea was to use heirloom carrots, and to cut them in cross sections so that they're really thin. And these are these long, beautiful carrots that are different colors, so it's appealing to the eye. And you can make a really delicious spice blend that's low calorie by replacing salt, or let's say half the salt, with nutritional yeast. It's a salty taste with a whole lot of umami flavor, and is really easy to integrate in replace of salt, so that the sodium's lowered. Then, like, the spice blend would be a Cajun mix, which is paprika, cayenne, cumin, fennel seed is a really awesome taste in there as well. Just to have a little bit of everything between tangy, salty, sweet, everything that you'd be looking for in the typical fast food experience, where our brain is craving all these sugars and sodium and fat. This can be replaced by taking natural flavors, healthy flavors like fennel seed or cumin, that have this unique quality that kind of satisfies like the tangy or the umami flavor. So it would be a spice blend of cayenne, fennel, paprika, nutritional yeast, and pepper, and then also garlic powder and onion powder, which have a lot more sodium, but would be better trade-off than whatever MSG kind of other equivalents you can think of for that kind of taste. And then olive oil is known as the healthiest alternative, the healthy oil, and it has a ton of benefits and just kind of the least devastating in terms of health implications when you're going on a scale from something like that cottonseed and corn oil mix to animal fat. And then on the other scale is the one that appeals to the Mediterranean diet, olive oil. Thank you for listening.